Okay, here what we are going to do is that in this tutorial I am going to ship this logic to another thread, right? I'm going to ship this logic to another thread. Let's write the method. You can say private void and counter. I'm going to have the counter, and let me write over here this counter, and you can call counter directly over here to get the output. And here I can say private void, and you can say threaded counter, and here let me create new thread, and here you can have the runnable. You can use Java 8, that's not an issue, right? Dot start, and I am simply going to call over here what you can say counter on the another thread, right? So you have invoked the logic of counter, right? You have invoked the logic of counter in the another thread. So you created the thread runnable dot start. Now on the click of this starter, what I'm going to do is that let me call threaded counter. That's it. So on the click of start counter, you are going to give call to the threaded counter and see what happens after this. If I run the code, right? So let me open logcat and see, this is working typically. Okay, see, you are getting one exception. Can you see this exception, what it is saying? Called from wrong thread, android.view. Called from wrong thread, right? And see the exception message. Only the original thread that created a view hierarchy can touch its views. Only the thread which created the view hierarchy, which is nothing but the main thread. So presently what you are doing is something like this. So you have one thread which is nothing but the main thread, which is creating all the UI elements, something like this. So this is your main thread, right? You have shipped logic of going to the server and coming to the back over here, but you are doing one mistake over here, right? So this thread has created your all the view hierarchy. Consider that this text view has been created by this thread, right? And you are trying to assign data from this worker thread. I am going to call it as main thread, and this would be the worker thread. This is nothing but what worker thread is. So you are trying to assign some data from worker thread to the text view, and that is not allowed. Only the view who has created this text box, edit text button, radio button, checkbox, list view, whatever it is, right? The thread which created this can only manipulate this thing. Means instead of going directly to this, you should pass. So consider that this is your counter, threaded counter, or this is a counter. That counter should give some data back to this thread, and then main thread will update the UI. So it will look like this. So you would be having main thread over here. You would be having something called as main thread over here, right? You would be having main thread, and on the main thread you are asking worker thread, you are asking worker thread, right, to do any heavy logic, right? This is the any heavy logic, right? So this is anything, right? This is any heavy logic you are asking, and this worker thread should give some data back to the main thread, right? And this main thread should update the UI. So main thread updates the UI. That's why some people call it as UI thread in the swing, right? Many people call it as UI thread. So only and only main thread is responsible for updating the UI. This is the principle. This is the fundamental that you need to understand. So worker thread and the main thread, right? Now communication between worker thread to the main thread is today's agenda. That's what we are going to learn. There are different things to do this thing, right? Very first thing we are going to see in the handler. What do we mean by handler? How with the help of handlers, which is very primitive, you are going to communicate from worker thread to the main thread. In the handler we are going to see that thing, but in the next tutorial. So keep watching.